Do that. Excuse me. My name is Dr. Linda Grooms, and I am from Regent University School of Education as my colleague. I'll let you introduce yourself, Don.
Okay, sorry, got to unmute myself. I'm Don Finn. I am associate professor at Regent University and have the pleasure of working with Linda now for the past 18 years. So in looking at our study, we really wanted to find out what drives doctoral students to stay within their program, to persist in their studies. One of the things that we have found throughout the years is that there are high attrition rates. And so what we based our study on when we were looking at these students, we had really two main theories that we looked at. The first is adult learning principles and the idea of andragogy. Now, andragogy sometimes is called a theory. Malcolm Knowles, who is the one who brought it to the limelight, if you will, in the late 60s, and had vigorous discussions about it through the 70s and 80s, called it a theory initially, but they really are principles. And as you can see, the adult learning principles, there are really 5 primary adult learning principles promoted by andragogy. But ultimately, they are based on the idea that adults learn differently than children, and that the instructor is one who serves in a role as a facilitator of learning. But you can see the 5 assumptions related to problem-centered, prior experience, how that factors into their knowledge and their motivation, typically intrinsic motivation, the immediacy of the application, and developing skills to be self-directed. Yet there's another principle that is not necessarily highlighted as much, but is quite relevant to the doctoral experience, particularly the candidate's experience, the idea of heutagogy. Self-determined learning, in other words, is how it is referred to, where the characteristics of the learners is that they are independent and autonomous, that they really own the learning, and that they are more sophisticated learners. In fact, if you look at the pyramid here on our slide, you will see that the wider, broader base of pedagogy, it shows that the learner maturity typically is not that high. But as the maturity of the learner increases, the involvement and the engagement of the instructor decreases. And so andragogy is quite appropriate for those in master's level courses and even during doctoral coursework. But the idea is to move the learners to being more proactive, to being fully self-efficacious in order to design relevant learning experiences. And again, this is the premise on which doctoral candidates should be viewed. Linda?
Basically, what we did is, so we wanted to go straight to the people that were in the doctoral candidacy phase. They had finished all their coursework, they had finished any kind of a qualifying exam that they had, and they were literally writing their dissertation. And what we did is we sent out a screening survey and just to ask them some of those questions to be sure we got the appropriate people. We had 125 that actually completed that. It was only 4 or 5 questions. And then we formed them into focus groups. We had told them that we would do that. And so we had 24 focus groups and actually a total of 82 participants. And when you look at the next slide, will show you the breakdown. We had basically 20 males, 62 females, and you can see the percentage breakdown there, basically 25, 75%. And then when you look at the next slide, you can see that because we did send this out across the entire university, we weren't looking, we are both in the School of Education, but we were looking at the first, if you look from the left to the right, you'll see COM is communication, SBL, School of Business and Leadership, SOD is School of Divinity, SOE, of course, is School of Education, and SPC is School of Psychology and Counseling. And each one of those schools had a couple of different doctoral degrees. And you can see, as far as our responses, the people that participated, you can kind of see the breakdown as to how many people were responded in each. Also, we asked a question about, we wanted to kind of look to see how the breakdown was as far as our age group. So we looked at the Pew Research Foundation's categories, and so you can see that the majority of our students, you can see that 50 of them were in one category in the Gen X, whereas we had a few boomers, a few of the older people, and then we were beginning, and we can pretty much look that as we're progressing, that millennial category will continue to grow because of just the ages that people, we just asked them, we didn't tell them the categories, we just gave them the age ranges so that we didn't want to influence that at all. We just kind of wanted to get an idea. So, and then we looked at also the number of semesters that they were in the coursework. And you can see the majority of people were anywhere, or 53% were in 5 or more semesters of their coursework as far as in their dissertation phase.
This is also something very interesting because we were thinking amongst ourselves that this was a school of education phenomena, that we had people who were just in multiple semesters and kind of trudging along in the post coursework. But in fact, this was very consistent across the schools. You know, really, I think in a way, we were a little bit surprised to see that we actually had almost 66% of the folks that were in that 5 to 7 semester range. That definitely was an eye opener for sure. So with the interview questions that we had for the focus groups, we had a variety of different categories. We had done some review of the literature and found that there were different areas that applied to the experiences of individuals in the doctoral programs. And so we wanted to see how these portions or how these aspects of the program fed into their experience as a candidate. So you can see that we had the program related types of questions focusing on the coursework, and then how does the dissertation phase differ from coursework. We looked at persistence and completion and really wanted to focus in on how is your chair or your committee members, what influence are they having in your persistence, and yet how does your family or your peers, how do they support you? And ultimately, how do you find balance? And then we looked at relationships, and the relationships had to do with relationships with other doctoral candidates, as well as mentors that they might have, whether they're formalized mentor, parts of a formalized mentor program, or informal mentors. And then looking at their community, particularly what kinds of networks of support do they have that help to foster persistence. And being a Christian university, we also wanted to know what aspects of the Christian faith, how is the Christian faith integrate? How does that work, towards your persistence? Now, what we ended up doing, by the way, in the analysis, and you'll see this, and Linda will talk about this, is that we actually collapsed the relationships, community, and Christian faith categories into a single category for our discussion because we found so much commonality and common ideas that were shared in those with those questions.
First set of questions that we asked were really basically program related, and we were asking questions like, how did you feel involved? How did you sense the whole feeling of community when you were in your coursework, and how did that differ when now that you're in your dissertation phase? And was there a difference? And of course there was, as we all know, because we've all been there. And some of the coursework components, of course, were discussion boards, as you can see the list there, special Zoom nights with professors for Q&A in classes, Facebook groups, that kind of thing. But then when you looked over on the dissertation side, during the coursework, as we all know, you've got very specific timelines that things are due. The course does end at a specific time, where all of a sudden with dissertation, the timelines are very much self-made. And that goes back to that self-directedness and self-determined learning that we were kind of looking at. So again, having those timelines, and then they said that they had formed, a lot of them had formed Facebook groups outside of the general group with their faculty members, sometimes just in the larger phase, just to be able to keep some contact, so they weren't isolated. And then also, one of the things that Dawn and I do is the whole idea of huddles, where we have, with our own dissertation people, we have monthly meetings with them where we will just have a half hour to an hour and a half discussion just to find out how they are. We might have presentations. We may present something. I know next time I'm going to talk a little bit more about writing and how writing at this phase is so much different than other kinds of writing that we've done. And we're going to really, because as we all know, there's certain areas that they need a little bit more attention.
You
So
know, one of
then
the
as,
I
go
also
ahead.
try. Yeah, I was just going to say one of the things that I try to do with my huddles as well is if I have somebody who has recently defended their proposal or has had their final defense, I invite them and encourage them to join in so that they can share their experience. Because again, we are in an online program, and while we do have some folks who might be local or regional who will come in to actually come to campus to defend their dissertation, the vast majority of these things happen online. And so there are a lot of questions that are associated with that type of delivery and those types of defenses. So as we looked at the persistence and completion, we also started to ask about the relational nature, the relationships that they have, and what do they need from their chair? What do they need from their committee members? And a lot of things that we determined are probably common, outside of Regent University, but certainly we saw consistency across the schools within Regent University is to have chairs, and particularly chairs is what we mainly focused on, who are available and who are approachable, who are willing to talk with them, set up meetings to engage in brainstorming. Some even talked about having text chats and text check-ins that they had from their chairs to see how they were doing. And also, there seems to still be a lot of confusion across the schools with the process and so on. So having a program web page that outlines the process is very helpful. And again, the huddles, those specified meetings, those kind of open meetings were also noted. And then looking at the family and this peer support. And what's interesting about the family and peer support is that a number of folks said, my family members don't quite get it. And a lot of times I am asked, are you done with that paper yet? And those types of things. And yet still they noted that even though they didn't fully understand the process, they were supportive and very encouraged and actually proud of them. Of them in their process here. And then we asked, gosh, how do you balance all of this stuff? Because I got to be honest with you, Monday was the 19th anniversary of me defending my dissertation. I don't know that I could do it 19 years later, personally, because there's a lot to it. And yet, how do you balance these things? So many of them talked about, how they're juggling things, but how they also need flexibility and understanding. They're learning to set boundaries and say no. They take opportunities to get off of work early and to find that study place where they can have consistency. You want to take this one, Linda?
Sure. And then we looked at we continued that theme of relationships, and Dawn mentioned earlier, we found that these categories somewhat collapsed into each other because there was a lot of overlap. So we did combine them, and basically they were talking about that need for support, need for research sharing within each other, and we as chairs can kind of build that in. But they were talking about it would be nice if we had that more on a school level or even a university level, which we hadn't thought of before. Then we kind of, do you have a mentor? Did you have a mentor, whether it's formal or informal? We happen to have a formal mentorship in our school, but most schools do not have that. And so they would talk about how that was somebody that they could connect with, that could, give them some motivation and inspiration and maybe even add some humor to the whole situation. And then, of course, we asked about their community and Christian faith. And, one person, we got quotes there, said it really helped ground them, their Christian faith did, and really encouraged them when the times were tough. And we heard a lot of that. And then we also asked them, what are some of the other factors that might help you to persist? Again, we were looking at what kind of things that we have in the programs, but what kind of things also can we add to the programs? And one of the things that came up was, that they really help that what was good was that professors are serving as, you know, as role models, but also that they might need something. It was even brought up in my huddle. I had one Tuesday night, and one of the things that was brought up even then again was the whole idea of a statistics tutor, because they might have had statistics earlier in their program, and then by the time they get to the dissertation and they're focusing on one or two specific things to separate out, they needed somebody to bounce those ideas off of besides just their chair.
So as we look at this, there's a paradigm shift going from andragogy to heutagogy. And that shift is a big one for folks. And so just a few things is that, you know, we need to encourage our candidates to really embrace the change, that they are the ones driving the ship, that we need to look at programs and in building into our programs ways to really promote self-determined learning, to really promote them to be more autonomous as they move closer to the dissertation phase, and also to encourage professors to be to really promote self-determined learning and encourage them to hand over the reins for the process. And so there's our contact information. I'm going to stop the share because I think we just made time.